Now, as we enter the third month of what is building up to be Nigeria's most competitive presidential election since 1999, what are the disturbing and troubling patterns that appear to be emerging and that should concern us all? Well, according to Agora Policy, an Abuja-based national policy think tank, there are at least 3 worrying issues that are cause for concern. And top of that pecking order is the fact that the campaigns are taking on an increasingly violent nature, both physical and verbal, with 24 people killed so far. And it warns that for a country battling insecurity and with religious, regional and ethnic fault lines being dragged into the ballot, it could get a lot worse. So whatever happened to the peace accord signed by the presidential candidates? And is there an urgent need to get a new set of commitments from them? With more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the policy strategist, Arise News analyst, and founder and executive director of Agora Policy, Waziri Adio. Thank you, Waziri, for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
So, what are the patterns that appear to you to be emerging as this election draws near? Patterns that you see as disturbing and potentially detrimental. Let's start with the first, violence.
Yeah, that is something that should bother all of us because not just how we are configured as a country, but also because of history of political violence following elections. If you remember, 1964-65, there was this widespread violence in the south, in the western region.
Well, I was in diapers, so I wouldn't remember.
In the western region, I wasn't born. In the western region, the Wet team that eventually one of the things that led to the collapse of the First Republic and the intervention by the military. Then in 1983, we also had the same widespread violence in the western region, or the present southwest. And in 2011, we also had very disturbing stuff. So, but when you look at where we are now, especially where the election is, around the fault lines, whether it's religious or regional, and when you now throw in this stuff about violence, we're still 3 months away from the actual election. So this is something that should worry everyone, and we need to pay attention to certain things. The first thing is that the candidates themselves and the parties, they need to exercise leadership. Former President Goodluck Jonathan memorably said that his presidency is not worth the blood of a single Nigerian. So this is where we need people to step up to the plate and say that we don't need this. We need people to just
and be very vocal and forthright about that.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that yes, we have people who are mediators. The peace committee. They've made them to sign agreements, and all of that. But they need to do beyond that. Now that you have scores of people already killed, many people injured, and there's no letting off. So they need to call them back to the table and tell them that the candidates, they need to watch what they are saying. They need to call their supporters to order, and beyond that, we also need to make sure that when people flout the law. Right, not just the electoral law. If you inflict violence on another person, that's a criminal offense. Let there be consequence management. Over time in this country, people do all these things and get away with them. So you have impunity, breeding more impunity, and that puts all of us at risk.
Well, that's a very important point you make there. In other words, it sounds as if that peace accord has somewhat either expired or been superseded by events, and there is a need for new commitments, is pretty much what you're saying. But perhaps in just the same way that maybe election think tanks like Agora Policy, the Center for Democracy and Development, think tanks that are very good at fact-checking the candidates and telling us this is where they've got things wrong and this is where they've got their calculations sort of out of whack. Maybe those think tanks should also be calling out the politicians, as you're doing now, I suppose, calling out the politicians and their supporters who do or say things that could breach the peace and put pressure on the security agencies and on INEC as well.
Absolutely. That would be very important. But it's not just work for the think tanks alone. It's work for all of us. The price of liberty is...
But I mean, you're drawing attention to it now, so it's important because...
But we need to do it as all of society. Unfortunately, people are becoming partisan. And, you know, so if you like candidate A, no matter what they say or do, it's kosher. But there are certain things that shouldn't be on. Look at it. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar went to Borno State, and his convoy was stoned. That should be a no-no. We should, you know, we have had this democracy for about 24 years now. So it's not just about the length of time. The spirit, the maturity that should go with it, should also be there. So, you know, whatever differences we have, we should be able to resolve them at the ballot box. So the idea of verbally attacking someone or physically attacking someone should be a no-no.
No, I agree with you.
And we all need to do that. The security agencies need to step up their game, and they need to be impartial. They need to be firm, they need to be proactive, they need to be impartial to make sure that when people fall out of line, you bring them, you take the law to them. And, you know, as long as people do these things and get away with it, they will continue to do it.
But I think that's why I said it's important that think tanks like yours call out these things when they happen. Because obviously now we're addressing the issue and a lot more attention is focused on it. Now, violence is just one of the disturbing patterns that you see emerging. The other one is what you see as the growing intolerance for political difference.
This is also something that should be that should give all of us a reason for pause, because there's also a potential of that becoming violence. Right? You know, so it's very important. Democracy at its core is about freedom, and you know, I have a right to look at the world whichever way I want to look at it. I have a right to prefer a particular candidate to another. My right might be suboptimal. My position might be suboptimal, but my right is not inferior to yours. Yours is not superior to mine. So, you know, democracy is about dialogue, is about deliberation, is about persuasion, not about imposing your wish on others. And we've seen this especially in this particular election, where once people disagree or once people have a different point of view, they are shouted down. You know, they are cancelled. They are bullied. Right. Look at, for example, okay, I don't want to go into particular individuals now, but the right of a particular an individual A to choose a particular candidate, right, is not inferior to the right of a individual B to choose another candidate. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to respect that right. And what you do is, you know, you try and engage them, you try and persuade them, not by saying they are stupid, they don't mean well for the country, you know, and they should, you know, they should be
Well, cancelled. You know, politics is a very emotive thing, and it's not just in Nigeria, but across the world. And I'm not in any way justifying, I agree with you 100%. But my mother always said, there are two things you don't want to discuss. Don't discuss politics, don't discuss religion if you don't want to get into strife.
And unfortunately, because of the particular, the way this particular competition is poised, it's not just that you have to discuss politics, you also have to discuss religion. You also have to discuss region. So the mix is already combustible.
Absolutely.
And that's the more reason why we need to, you know, you know, play the politics the right way. Right?
I agree with you 100%.
And one of the things I also mentioned, you know, that I like mentioning is to remember Claude Ake, you know, one of the foremost political scientists produced by this country, one of the best in Africa, says you cannot have democracy without having Democrats.
Absolutely.
Right. So part of the democratic process is that you have to respect the rights of others. You also have to respect decisions that might be taken by the majority, that might be a misguided, you know, majority, But hey, you have to respect
In other words, democracy
yeah.
manifests itself
Yeah.
on a micro and a macro level. So
Absolutely.
you can't be accusing
Yeah.
the government and other people or whoever of not practicing democracy, and yet
And
you're not doing it on that
yourself.
level.
Yeah.
That's a very important point.
Yeah.
And the third worrying pattern that emerged from your analysis is the sense that if the election doesn't produce a particular outcome, in other words, if my candidate doesn't win, then the ballot must have been manipulated. How dangerous is that?
That is also very undemocratic, right? And I think this is actually this also links back to the issue of violence. You know, if you believe that your candidate must win, and if your candidate doesn't win, right, it means that the election has been stolen or the process has been manipulated.
We call it the Trump effect.
Yes, you know, so you are more or less laying the groundwork for discrediting the election, and possibly enabling people to take laws into their hands. You know, and you know, the thing is this: we need to encourage INEC to do the best election that they can do. Right, give them the resources, use of technology, money on time, you know, and all of that. That is fine. We need to encourage that. But we also need the players to play by the rules. And part of that is that, you know, if the election, even when INEC has conducted the most credible election ever, there's still room for candidates and parties to disagree. But the room for that disagreement is in the court. It's part of the process already envisaged. You know, so what you need to do is, you know, not go to the street, you go to the court and you make your case. And if you go to the court, yes, the court, and we have seen in the history of this democracy where courts have overturned decisions, you know, by the electorate and by INEC, right? So, but even when you go to the court, there's nowhere it's written that you have to have your way, right? So part of being a Democrat, going back to Claude Ake again, is that you have to accept the process. After exhausting all the options, then you move on.
But it's also part of that pattern of not accepting defeat that inevitably it ends up in the courts.
Yeah. No, there's no problem with going to court.
No, I understand that.
You know, go to court, make your case, and sometimes even you can win in court on technicalities, right? So make your case, but even if you make your case and the court doesn't agree with you, you move on. If you go back to the US in 2000, right? Many people up to today still believe that Al Gore won, right? But the moment the Supreme Court ruled that George Bush Jr. won the election, they moved on. They
didn't quite move on with Donald Trump, though, did they?
Well,
and they still haven't moved on. But that's not that. I mean, we don't have to, because oftentimes people try to justify by saying, well, in America, blah, blah, blah. We don't have to pick the bad things that happen in other countries. We can pick the good things. And the good thing is what you talked about, Al Gore and Bush. But given all this, given the fact that, as you said, you know, losers often never accept that they've lost in Nigeria, which is why most elections are disputed. And given all your meticulous and impressive research, do you believe that in these rather troubling circumstances, INEC can organize free and fair elections?
I think so. And I've said this on this platform many times before, that if there's a national institution that has shown the appetite for improving over time, I think it's INEC. And this, especially, you can go back to from after the 2011 election. In fact, you can even go, you know, further than that, from the 2007 fiasco, right? Since then, we have seen an effort by INEC to always improve on the last record. So I believe that INEC, you know, and they have all the time this time around. They ask for enough time, they have it. I disagree with, you know, how much time that they have, you know, because you are running election for almost a year.
And it's costly.
You know, it's costly, not just for the candidates and the parties, but also for the country, because, you know, all the political actors are distracted. But they have all the time. I believe they have all the resources. Part of what the 2022 Electoral Act says is that INEC must have the resources, you know, up to like a year in advance. So I believe they have all of that. But what I think is that they need our support. We shouldn't be second guessing them. We shouldn't be haranguing them. We should give them the benefit of the doubt. And trust that they will deliver on their mandate. And it doesn't mean that everybody will be happy. It would be nice, like we had in 2015, you had an election, the person that didn't win chose not to go to court, right? It would be nice if after the election there's no litigation, fine. But there's also nothing wrong with contesting the outcome of the election.
As long as it doesn't turn violent.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't turn violent.
Okay. Waziri, I want to thank you ever so much. Waziri Adio is the founder and executive director of Agora Policy. He is also an Arise News analyst. Thank you very much.